also didn't apply to any safety school. Come on. Okay, just come on. You're just gonna be in the video. Oh. Hey all, so this is my third video in my law school admission series. This one is going to focus on Waitlist. It's going to focus on the decisions that I decided to make and not to make, and why. It's also going to focus on how all of the craziness with coronavirus impacted where I ultimately decided to go to school. So, spoiler alert, if you couldn't tell from my Georgetown hoodie, I'm going to Georgetown Law this fall. Let's start with my admissions results. This isn't something that I'm sure a lot of people are willing to admit in person on the internet, and I'm gonna admit it's a little weird and difficult for me to do this too, but I was waitlisted for every school that I applied to except for Georgetown. I applied to Yale, Harvard, Columbia, and NYU, and was slapped with waitlists from all 4 of them. Girl, okay, just come on. I also didn't apply to any safety schools, which I don't recommend doing, because I was extremely lucky. Oh! I also didn't apply to any safety schools, which I don't recommend doing, because what if you don't get into any of them? That's terrifying. Somehow, not only did I luck out in getting into Georgetown, but they gave me a scholarship for 2/3 of my tuition for the entire time that I would be there. And I feel extremely, extremely grateful and privileged to have those options. I'm going to be attending Georgetown Law's evening program this fall, and I'm going to be able to keep my full-time job, which is extremely fortunate. What were my credentials and why was I waitlisted? My GPA was a 3.85. I believe I had good letters of recommendation, but there's no telling. I believe I had good essays and a good personal statement, but also there's no telling. And I've been working in a related job field for the past 5 years. But what could have counted against me is I took the GRE, and my test scores, if they were converted from a GRE to a LSAT, would have been in the almost 90th percentile, but for many top tier schools, that's significantly below their average. I also applied close to a lot of schools' deadlines, which, as I mentioned, the early bird tends to get the worm. Also, let's get into the impact of coronavirus on all of this. A lot of schools doubled or tripled the size of their waitlist this year because they were protecting something called yield. Yield is essentially the number of students who show up to attend a school in the fall versus the number of people who were actually accepted. Now, I'm gonna go on a mini tangent here, but bear with me, it's related. When you're accepted to a law school, you can do something called deferring your admission, which means you put off your acceptance for this year and you're saying, okay, well, I'll take it next year. When you defer, or if you turn down a school, they have an open seat. And that's what they use their waitlist for. They can take a student from their waitlist and give that seat to a student who either deferred or turned them down. And the typical rule of thumb, or the overwhelming rule this year, is that if you're accepted off of a waitlist, then you don't have the option to defer your admission to the following year. In many ways, the limitations that law schools put on waitlist students in terms of deferrals ensures that they get the statistics and the type of student that they want that year. Law schools also use waitlists as a tool to keep their stats up. So for example, say they accept a white male student with a 177 LSAT and a 4.0 GPA, and say he turns it down or he defers. Now, that law school has the option of going to their waitlist and accepting a student that has similar credentials so that they keep their LSAT average and their GPA average really, really high. So knowing all of this, let's get back on topic. When you get waitlisted for a school, it's not an outright rejection. It's a yes, maybe. And the difficulty in that is when you have waited for multiple months to receive a law school admissions decision, getting a yes, maybe can be extremely disappointing. In order to stand out amongst your peers on the waitlist, you're gonna have to jump through a couple of more hoops to get to that finish line. Most students can submit additional application materials, or you can send in something called a letter of continued interest. I'm gonna call it a LOCI. I'm not sure if that's how it's pronounced, but it is in this video. In a LOCI, it's pretty customary to explain why that law school is your top choice, or why you continue to be interested in admission at that particular school. Now you can send one of these letters to any waitlist that you're on. You can send them to multiple schools where you've been waitlisted. But keep in mind that law schools want to accept kids off the waitlist who are actually going to yield. So it's important to go into why exactly you want to go to that particular school. For Yale Law School, for example, they explain once you're waitlisted that writing a letter of continued interest is optional, versus Harvard, where they explain if you don't write a letter of continued interest, you're likely not to be taken off the waitlist. Now, whether or not a law school is transparent about a LOCI being a really important component of getting you off of the waitlist, you should know that if you don't write one, you're likely not to get off of anyone's waitlist. But there's more. If you're accepted off of a waitlist, many schools will expect you to make a very short time decision, meaning that you might not have the opportunity to look over your financial aid information or grant information before you decide to commit to that school. Now, your decision isn't necessarily binding. The police aren't going to come arrest you if you don't end up going to that school. But you're going to have to tell them a yes or no decision, and you're not going to have a lot of financial information to base that decision off of. Let's talk about how insane making a financially blind decision is in general, but especially during a pandemic. Law school is extremely expensive. The average law school graduate comes out with about $150K of debt. And by the time you graduate, that could be upwards of $170 or $180K. Some law school graduates that go to top tier schools go on to work at big law firms where they're gonna get a larger paycheck. The sentiment here is that if you go into debt for school, you can work for a large law firm for a couple of years, live modestly, and pay off all of your student loans. For other students, some of them decide to go into public service, and they participate in a law school repayment program where their school pays back some of their loans. And after 2 years, they can do something called public service loan forgiveness, where theoretically, and mind you, the GAO did a report on this in 2018 where an extremely small percentage of students were actually granted this. Then your loans will be forgiven and done away with. But for a lot of people, this is not how the story ends. I'm gonna say this once, and I feel like it's the most important part of this entire series. Law schools are businesses too. They are not going to look out for your financial future. That is your job. And you should not allow them to sell you dreams to the point that you remain in debt until you're well into your 60s. If you take a step back and look at how law school graduates of the class of 2020 are doing, you should recognize that people are going through a really tough time. Because of the virus, many people haven't been able to take the bar exam, or they've had job offers rescinded because job markets are really in a crazy place right now. And while it's very possible that everything's going to turn around, I want this to be an example of how crazy things can go in a very short amount of time. So for those reasons, I ultimately decided to hell with all of those waitlists and all of the anxiety that came with remaining on a waitlist. Y'all could have had a bad It wasn't worth the anxiety to leave myself in that limbo. I also realized that even if those top tier schools would have accepted me off of their waitlist and I'd written a letter with continued interest and jumped through all of the hoops, it didn't necessarily make sense to go to those schools during a pandemic. And I decided that it would be best for my mental health to go to a school in a city where I already lived and to take a price tag that was actually reasonable for me. While I was trying to make these decisions, there was a lot of advice out there stating that I should do everything I can to get off these waitlists and I should go regardless of the price tag. And I really strongly disagree with that advice. I disagree with that advice even more if a school is asking you to make a financially blind decision. The only way someone can realistically ignore price tags for school is if someone or something out there is paying for it for them. When you're applying to law schools and deciding which waitlist to stay on and which waitlist to not stay on, I advise anyone out there to prioritize their mental health. Look out for your finances and make decisions that are going to keep you at peace. Especially during a pandemic, those decisions are important now more than ever. If you're a smart, brilliant person and you're good at things, I promise where you go to law school is not going to make or break your future. For all the students out there who are still on waitlist, I absolutely hope that you're able to live out your dreams. As for me, I've dropped off of those waitlists. Georgetown Evening Program, here I come. I'd love to see your comments below. Are you on any waitlists, and did coronavirus impact any of your decisions? Why or why not? I'll see you in a couple of weeks.